Yes, it's the Monday Club. It is just after 7. We're not too late. My voice will try and hold up as best it can. Another weekend, another heavy weekend, Jonathan. I needed a drink after what happened on Saturday afternoon. So,
Yeah,
aye,
you and me both. You and me both.
the vocal cords are still recovering, as is my feelings towards our beloved Celtic because it was not a good weekend. We did a PMP on Saturday after the game, kind of right after it, which is difficult at those times. And I think it'd be remiss me not to say at times it can sound like maybe me and Terry are interrupting each other and stuff. It's just two passionate fans, probably me more than him, to be fair. But it's definitely because we care. Do you know what I mean? And you can't help but me go on straight after it and be a wee bit more psyched up. But now we're picking up the pieces, and that is what we are looking to do. All that good stuff means give us a wee like, give us a share if you can. There was 1,000 watching live the other night, Jonathan. Pretty mental
Oh,
stuff.
I heard.
We've had 10,000 views, so by sharing all that, especially the Rangers fans, all those Rangers fans, always remember this. When Lusunes and all the like are watching and they're obsessed with how I look, always remember by coming on here, watching adverts, you're paying my rent. I don't mean the bus passengers, they're not. But the Rangers ones, there's one already. You keep paying my rent, son. Great Monday viewing. You know it. Keep paying my rent, big boy. It's a penthouse after all. Hey, Pam. Okay, all that good stuff as well means if you want to become a member, like so many of you have, it is only $1.99 a month. It is entirely up to you. With the likes of Pam, Jim Dolan, Jim C, San Fan Celtic, Marc Cairney, D-Mac, Alex, loads of yous have. It's $1.99 a month, content talks free, entirely up to yourself. We made a wee decision before we went live. We were not going to go ahead with the usual. Well, Russell, I think it's very important that we read the room sometimes, and I think the banter's always good when it's in our favour. I don't think Celtic fans, to a man, are in the mood for it to be complete banter. So I'll get your thoughts, Jonathan, on the weekend. Maybe we'll dodge the well, Russell.
Yeah, I'm too annoyed myself to even be bothered with it this week, to be perfectly honest with you. I'm looking at it, we're in the season of presents and giving, Russell, and Celtic are, hand wrapping this championship to Rangers with how things have been going the past couple of weeks. We are watching things unwrap at the seams. It's going to be a season of coal if things don't improve for Brendan. Brendan has, got a lot of questions to answer now at the moment, as indeed do the board and everybody else at the club from top to bottom. It's been an absolute shit show. It's a bit of the nightmare before Christmas, I would say, is what we have witnessed over the past couple of weeks. And if we're looking at it going forward, Celtic, for me, over the next couple of weeks before that January window opens, are now, needing a bigger Christmas miracle than the birth of Christ itself. And I'm just not sure whether we've got the stomach for this or not. This week's going to be massive for the club, massive for Brendan Rodgers to try and prove that he can still get on top of things and prove that he can still be that elite level manager that we thought was coming back this time around. I think it's going to end up being massive for the board because there is such a big disconnect in every possible way with the club. You've got a disconnect at the moment between the board and its sections of the fan base, and that was shown right across the stadium at the weekend. You've had, a disconnect clearly between Brendan Rodgers and how the players are wanting to go about playing their games of football on the park. There's clearly some form of disconnect with what's happened in the summer transfer window, and that has just overflown into the fact that we're now having to see guys like Mikey Johnson getting an extended run in the team when he's consistently proven he's not good enough, and he's not the only one. There's been many examples of that, and we're now looking for really how on earth over the next couple of weeks, Russell, do we address this and ensure that we do damage limitation and then we open the window in January. And what we need in January is a situation like what happened in Ange Postecoglou's first season, and that is Celtic hitting the front foot fast and getting the players in that Brendan Rodgers wants. A lot of questions to be answered over the next couple of weeks. It's over to Celtic to find those answers.
Well, it absolutely is. And we're going to try our best to give our opinion on what those answers might look like, what they could be. It's a weird one. As you were, like, see naive comments like that, your dad's night shift. As you were, our dad's deed. So you're wrong there, pal, I'm afraid. So, again, you keep paying my rent, son. But yes, I mean, I think when it comes to stuff like what Celtic plan to do, I was trying to get across a message. I don't know if I did it very well, looking back. I was trying to say at the weekend, Rodgers has played a hand very early in terms of, we knew when he was talking about the extra need for quality, it seemed very much like this is him trying to put pressure ahead of a window. But the games in between are getting tougher and tougher. And not because the teams are, but we're making games look tougher and tougher. We're going into games with a poor attitude, an almost weird sort of lack of oomph, for want of a better term, is in this Celtic team before every game, or second half it was last week. They started the game well, second half was terrible. This week both halves were the same. And to actually muddle your way through to January now is going to be difficult, because whilst he's not thrown the players under the bus, when he's talking about we actually needed quality, and I said that in the summer, inadvertently, he's saying who came in isn't quality. We need to accept that. So I do think, to be completely honest with you, his comments to the media have affected the team in a negative manner as well. I also don't think the players are shining themselves any glory either. And I'm also not convinced they're on page with what the tactic is. Now, it's December now. So when you talk about identities and things like that, Brendan's good enough to have got his identity stamped on the team right now. And if this is it, then it ain't good enough. I dare say it's not. I'm not sure whether the players are on board with the manager, like you were alluding to at the start, and he's maybe isolated himself more from them and made that situation a bit worse by trying to aim at the board that he should have aimed at in the summer if he had his wits about him. Instead, by doing it now, maybe the players have took that on the chin a wee bit and felt, fuck you. Like, you shouldn't be going to the media to be basically saying the guys that came in aren't quality and you're not happy with the quality that you're working with. That's backfired big time. Even though, we need to be honest, I thought I was all for it at the time.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely a lot of arguments to be made that the players certainly have far more levels than they've shown over the past couple of weeks. And I think it's a point that we have to try and address, as well as that, despite the fact the summer window didn't go the way it should have done in most people's eyes, despite the fact that most of the players that seem to have come in the summer aren't now getting opportunities because Brendan doesn't think they're good enough to get those opportunities, the players that are still on the park should be picking up, more results and better performances than they have done over the past couple of weeks, because I think there's ways to lose games, and what we've seen over the past couple is that Celtic are not losing games in the way we would expect them to lose games in a domestic manner. And that is, by at least being on the front foot, taking the game to opposition, always still making them really work until the last minute. Hearts were comfortable at the weekend at Celtic Park. That shouldn't be happening. I don't care what's going on with the manager, the players, or anything like that. Celtic at home to Hearts, we should be putting the pressure and piling it on them in that second half when we're 2-0 down. We need to try and change things up. We need to try and do things slightly differently when the game is getting away from us. And that's probably been the most disappointing aspect, I think, from the past couple of games that Celtic have been involved in domestically. I think Kilmarnock worked us out in the second half at Rugby Park, and we didn't seem to have an answer. Hearts get themselves in front at Celtic Park and then know how to defend against us and make it into a very routine victory. And you're looking at it and you're expecting a lot more from the players. I mean, touching on what you're saying about Brendan Rodgers and his comments, obviously, about banging the drum, about not having enough quality there. It's certainly one way of trying to get his message to the board, and time will tell if that ends up paying dividends when the January window opens. But people are forgetting that in between now and then, we've got to play a very difficult home game against Livingston, because, mark my words, Livingston will come to Celtic Park at the weekend and they will put every man behind the ball. They will try and make that as difficult as possible, like they always do, and put on a defensive masterclass is what they're aimed to do. And they know if they get a set piece, you put them on top of Joe Hart and there's always a chance something could happen. That's what we're seeing play out this season when Celtic have been dropping points. So that's a tricky one. You've then got Dens Park, on Boxing Day, which is by no means a given either. And then, of course, you've got the Derby before you can even, look at strengthening the squad. And Rangers are obviously running a bit of momentum now themselves, so we need to try and curb as fast as we possibly can. And there'd be no better time to do that than on the 30th of December when we play them. But at the moment, the way we are playing, it's very hard to see how we manufacture a win out of that game. And from where we were, 5-6 weeks ago to being where we are now, is baffling. But I'll put this back to you, Russell. I think he's kind of came out with these comments because he was very good results-wise in those first round of fixtures. We talked about that a lot. And they were all, predominantly the hardest ones on paper were away from home. I wonder if he's maybe thought because we're at home in these second round of fixtures that the players that he had at his disposal would have been good enough, and they should have been good enough to deal with that. And I don't know if complacency is now set in with Brendan, that because he had a near flawless record on the first round of fixtures, believe it or not, even if some performances weren't as good as they could have been, that he's maybe thought at home we'll be able to push on to another gear and I can kind of get away now with turning my attention towards the board, and it's backfired spectacularly. And I actually think at the moment, Russell, Celtic Park is becoming a very difficult place for the players to actually play, because it's not going to take much for the fans to get on the players' back. And I think Saturday, again, could turn into a very poisonous atmosphere very quickly if Celtic don't find a breakthrough early on.
Well, it's interesting what your point is there about the home games, because this is a situation they've created for themselves. Remember that as well. Everything, whether you look at the manager's performance right now, which I'm sure we'll do, they're involved, or they don't have the corners to put a better case forward to Dermot as to who they want to be in charge. And therefore, he goes for the guy he wants. They didn't do their homework well enough, and they didn't have someone better than Brendan. Dermot went all out for them, and it's damning on them that Desmond doesn't trust them to be able to make these decisions. He doesn't trust them. That's why he went in and above their head. So useless they are. But then Dermot takes a step back. They take over the player recruitment. Brendan's in the very fortunate position when you look at the money. And let's think about what he does then. Fuck all. He's a sweet level of nothing. He lets that board run amok. And of course they're going to bring in crap because they're rubbish. Then we get to the stadium atmosphere. The board made the standing section clearly with the Green Brigade in mind. Now they want to take that aspect away. It becomes all the more poignant because the standing section combined with the Green Brigade naturally makes it an even more focal point for atmosphere in that ground. So they're complicit in all that. So then when they ban the Green Brigade, which I think was, whether people like it or not, a hell of a lot influenced by the Palestine flags and their desperation to distance themselves from certain politics that might not fit the mainstream agenda, yet align themselves with Ukraine when it does fit the mainstream agenda. Keep your eyes on the board with stuff like that. Naughty. By doing that as well, it turns the place, for now, and as I've always said, whether it wasn't if the GB never came back, Celtic Park atmosphere would pick up again. Naturally, there would be the next version of the GB, the next jungle, whatever it may be. And Celtic's been around a long time. But in the short term, the lack of atmosphere naturally comes on the back of their absence. Then add to that the fact that the fans they think might be onside. And I dare say they comfort themselves at times with thoughts like, it's only when you look at the stadium, that section is probably representative of the Celtic support as a whole who don't like us. Well, it was the majority who sang Sack the Board. It was the majority that sang Lowell Get to Fuck on Saturday. And when that happens in a place that can't generate an atmosphere game to game, and the loudest chant they come is aimed at you as well, for me, it answers all the questions they should be asking of themselves. They are, in my opinion, beyond now reprieve. There is no point in anyone kidding on. This can be mended. The relationship between the fans and the board is far more across the board, if you like, than what the board would like to admit. And now, day to day, by banning a certain section of the fans that they think's the only problem at Celtic, they've had a rude awakening on Saturday that actually the problem lies with them. And in the meantime, by having that worse atmosphere at the ground, the team's impacted as well. Not the only reason for the team being impacted, by the way. Far from it. Wouldn't give them a pass for that. But it definitely plays a big factor.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of decision making that's gone on at boardroom level that has caused things to begin to burst at the seams. And every time they make a decision this season, it seems like they're making the wrong one. And when you continually make difficult and wrong decisions over time, that's going to start to irate your fan base. And they might have thought they could get away with banning the Green Brigade, and there had been a lot of Celtic fans that might have been okay, we could get on side with that, and could have taken up the board's argument that that was maybe the best thing to be doing at this time. But then there's also going to be that split in the support that they believe the Green Brigade are an essential part of the matchday experience at Celtic Park now, and are huge for the club in terms of getting results. So there's already a bit of friction there. There was already a bit of friction in the summer because of the recruitment process, and the fact that we're now seeing that recruitment was done very poorly when the manager will not pick most of the players that were brought in the summer. So you've got friction. If any, well, Palmer's really the only exception to the rule, and even then you wonder if he had full strength options out wide. If Maeda and Abada were fit, would Palmer play? I don't think so. So again, you're looking at that, and you've got to be honest and say the board created friction there with the transfer dealings. They've created friction with the Green Brigade. And if any part of that reason was because of the Palestine flags as well, they clearly haven't read the room very well, because I was at the European game where the Palestinian flags were getting flown by pretty much everyone. They were all around the stadium. So I think that was always going to be something that a lot of Celtic fans would question as well. And then when performances start to dip, because the board have created friction on those first 2 points, that is going to be when the fans begin to vent their frustrations at the board, because there's a pattern developing there of poor decisions throughout the season. That doesn't excuse the players' performances, by the way. That doesn't excuse, for me, Brendan Rodgers' inability to try different things this season when things haven't been working the way they should have. But I think because the board have made so many mistakes already this season, and not just this season, if we're being honest, and we go back through the history, they've made more bad ones than good ones over the years. And it's eventually just came home to roost. I think Postecoglou coming in saved their bacon because of what he brought to the club and how he managed to operate everything and just took control of every aspect of the club at that time. The moment they've gotten back in control of things like player recruitment, it was always going to end badly. And we're now beginning to see those results play out on the pitch. As I say, we've got the fans now divided. We've got a player and the players and the managers now divided as to what we're actually looking to achieve. And we've got a boardroom that, if they thought they didn't have any eyes on them now, they know they've got firmly 2 eyes on them by the vast majority of the Celtic support now. And it's creating the perfect storm for games at Celtic Park, because there is that element now of Celtic fans that are going to be looking at it. And if things aren't going well, they're going to vent their frustrations and they're going to let them know about it. And of course, that's then going to seep onto the pitch. And it's like we always say, if you don't have that united front at Celtic, then the results not naturally will take a negative effect, and that is what we're witnessing at the moment. And it's hard to see exactly how we address that over the next couple of weeks. But I tell you one thing that would be good, that would be making amends with the Green Brigade from the board. I think that's something that we can do in the short term, and trying to get them back in. But I'll put this back to you, Russell. I don't think they'll bother doing that either, because they know if they put the Green Brigade back in for the weekend, for example, they are their loudest critics, and they won't be able to help themselves either from obviously raising those questions to the board, and the board won't like that. And the board will not put the club's interests ahead of their own, unfortunately, and that is a sticking point for me, because I think that's one of the few things we can do at the moment until the window opens to try and improve the situation at Celtic Park, is actually bringing the Green Brigade back in and finding some form of agreement there, because there has to be some way of getting this resolved one way or another, especially before the derby.
It's petty pish. It's petty pish that sums them up. I just can't be bothered with it. And you're right, though. Now there is an agenda. Now they do have a reason not to bring them back. And the main reason now that they don't want to bring them back is you're absolutely spot on, because they'll go back in and their views will be, whether you've let us back in or not, thanks for that, by the way, patronising, we still want you out and we're going to vocalise it. And the board just go, fuck that. They've probably went up the Green Brigade in the popularity stakes, I think, to many in this period of time that they've been banned. My opinion, as I've always said, is I'm very much in the middle. If loads of rules have been broken, I can see how it got to this point. The timing of it, though, to me was a small-minded one that was based on the flags. Otherwise, you don't do it then. You just don't do it then. You've done it because it's on the back of the flags. Because all the other examples they gave have been building up for 12 months. So why not let it? What's the difference between 12 months, say 13, 14 months? Or if you were that bothered in the over that year, why hadn't you done it before? That timing has gained the Green Brigade popularity, gained them a voice, whilst Celtic are getting beat at home now as well, and the atmosphere is as bad as it is. The Green Brigade go up in popularity. And when they come back, or if they were to come back, they wouldn't change. And it's not for what they've done, it's for the bold chance. They would take the banners from 2021 and they would be in there demanding a change at the top of Celtic. And why? Well, if you're at the top of Celtic, you've no intention of leaving, and it'll be there as long as they're alive, quoting, or paraphrasing, I should say, Dermot Desmond's son there at the AGM. Why would you want them there to do that? Of course, they'd be absolutely right to be singing it or chanting it, but they don't want that. And the board, that is a massive point why the board won't allow them back in. But then you're kind of entering into dictatorship territories. People that pay good money, but we only let in who we like. They should all be given immediate refunds for the whole thing, no choice, if they've got no intention of bringing them back in. My hunch is they will try and ride this out. Get to January, make a couple of signings, reactive stuff as we're used to from this board, and then allow the Green Brigade in. Maybe then, after a few wins, maybe say the derby goes, if they get the win there, they'll be laughing. That gets trickier and trickier with the current backdrop that we've got. It's very, very naughty what's going on there. And it's only one example. The manager's pissed off them as well. All the fans are pissed off, and there's a section banned. You can't sign a decent player to save your life, but you force managers into having them anyway. They have to realise that everywhere they turn, they're shite at their job. And anyone this is the one bit of conditioning that they seem to have still worked their magic on for even those who don't want them there. And it'll be this. Financially, they've done a good job for Celtic. It's bullshit. It's utter bullshit. The amount of missed Champions League millions that actually, as you go with that, because you are a wee bit more ambitious in the window, you do speculate to accumulate, you do invest. Your team gets better and better. The more qualifications you make, the more better a player you can attract, the further in the tournament you might be able to go. I mean, even if it was just a few more last 16s, we're talking about, for Celtic, we're talking about a few more group stage qualifications. When I say a few more, we've qualified in the last 15 attempts. I think we've only been in it 6 times. 6 or 7 times out of the last 15 league wins.
Yeah.
That's unacceptable. Crazy. That's 150 million there. Minimum. Do not think because there's 75 million cash reserves, that means they have done a good job financially for Celtic. It's utter bollocks. You are falling in a trap. Nothing they're doing right now is working other than a fan base who love the club that much, support it through thick and through. They will sell out their season tickets, buy those kits year on year as a given, despite the lack of investment, leadership, guidance that shows a progressive, modern football club that the bold show. A fan base will still do that year on year. It bails them out every time.
Yeah, well, they know they can kind of take advantage of the fans in that way because they know how much the fans care about the club, and there's always going to be that income coming in for them. And it just doesn't seem as if they share the ambition of the supporters whatsoever. And this is why it gets all the more frustrating, I think, for fans this season, is because when you bring in somebody like Brendan Rodgers in the summer, expectation levels go up, that you're going to be making more of a fist of it over the course of the season in terms of recruitment, in terms of making sure you get the players in that Brendan Rodgers wants. And naturally, fans' expectations got raised, and then they've not met them whatsoever. They've not even came close to meeting them. It's almost as if I just don't really understand the logic in it. The more I think back to it as to why you go all in to bring Brendan Rodgers back to the club, make him your highest paying manager in the club's history, and then you take full control of buying the players away from him and do it yourself, and then end up surprised when it doesn't end up working out the way you want, and the manager decides that the players that he's having to deal with aren't good enough. And for me, that's something that massively needs to change, because the board are quite good at keeping the money for themselves. I read an article today about Peter Lawwell and the amount of money he's actually taken out of the club, Russell, since he first joined. Would you like to have a guess as to how much he's taken out of the club in his own salary over the years?
I know there was one season he got 3.2 million, which, again, I like to be factually accurate with these things. I'm positive it was one example he made 3.25 million in a season. I think it's turned in, though, to the fan base like he made that every year. I'm going to go double figures, though, in millions. Say 11, 12?
17 million he's had.
So it's closer to 20 than it is just to be in double figures. Wow.
Yeah, so he's been one of the highest paid chief executives in the UK. And if you were looking at the job he's done, would many people say over the last 20 or so years he's been good value for that money? And if that was a player out on the pitch that we'd spent that sort of big money on, would we feel we'd had a return on our investment? And I think there'll be question marks there about that. But they're not shy on making sure they are well reimbursed for their efforts at Celtic, is what the point is.
If you listen closely, I just heard someone give a round of applause. I think it was Michelle Moan who said good work. Yep, she was like, good work, Peter. I like this kid. She's the only one that could do that. Fucking hell, man. But yeah, sorry, carry on.
Yeah, well, I just mean if they're willing to take that sort of money out to pay themselves because they think they're doing such a good job, and they're wanting to be making sure they're getting paid at similar levels, by the way, to what the top chief execs were getting paid in the UK. They think they're worth that sort of money. Then okay, why then is that not what we're doing across the board? Across every aspect of the club. If we're wanting to pay chief executives wages, that are right up there with the highest paid in the UK at one point or another. Why is that not then being transferred across the recruitment side of it? Why are we still buying players and saying it's expensive to be spending £5-6 million on one player? As I say, that they can get certain things right in terms of, okay, if we're going to bring a manager in and we're going to need to bring Brendan Rodgers in, then they were willing to throw the money at him, but then they didn't really back him with anything else on top of that. And again, I'll go back. This isn't to excuse Brendan for what's been happening over the past few weeks, because I think if you're paying that sort of money for Brendan Rodgers, you're expecting to get far more value for your buck as well than what he's producing as a manager domestically over the past few weeks. I don't care who he's got playing for him. I think he should be doing a far better job than being schooled off the likes of Derek McInnes and Stephen Naismith. He should be feeling that managerial pride getting hurt quite significantly when he's suffering defeats to those two dafties. But, if you're going back to the club, if there's this sort of money that's getting invested, at boardroom level, they're taking quite high salaries, but then they're not willing to put it into the actual playing squad in terms of actually pushing the boat out, going for the more expensive players to try and push on. We were thinking at the start of the summer, this is going to be our season to actually push on in Europe. It's now turning out to be, we're going to need to panic buy in January just to stay ahead of our rivals across the city who, we've already emptied the manager out there, and we're still in this position that we're actually now chasing our tails. And frankly, there has to be questions asked as to how we've ended up in a mess like this. And for me, the bulk of the mess lies with the board, although they are not the only ones culpable for this. But I have to say, if they don't get their act together, there's going to be some serious protests in the immediate future at Celtic Park. I mean, you can paint a picture here that and it's not unlikely to me that we drop points in one of the next two games before Rangers. I don't think that's necessarily unlikely that we were playing, unfortunately, with the way it's going just now. And then, God forbid, we actually lost the derby at Celtic Park. The Sharks will be back at Celtic Park, I would imagine, in January. That's how critical we have now found ourselves in the next three games as to how important they are for our season. I think if Rangers end up winning that derby, then they are going to have all the momentum in the world to go on to win the league. It's very much beginning to feel a bit like the Ange Postecoglou's season in reverse in his first season, where Rangers have got the momentum, they've got that first cup in the bag. I don't think they're a great team, but momentum is such a big part in Scottish football, and at the moment Celtic look like they're about to fall off a cliff momentum-wise, with so many things going wrong, that I just think if Rangers were to win that derby in a week or two, we would be in a real uphill battle to retain the title. And I would imagine the protests against the board going into January would be right back up at COVID levels.
Well, hopefully so. If that were to be the case, hopefully it won't be based on results, but never take your eyes off the board anyway. But let's be real. And I like balance to the debate. At the end of the day, I've been very, very much Team Brendan, as always say. And he's the guy. See, to be honest with you now, I know there's now Lenny comparisons getting made, and how do we acted earlier that season? We all seen it coming. To be fair, I get that. But I still think Brendan right now, for me, is the best manager in there. But he's now really got to start convincing me of it as well. I'm doing it more through blind faith now, 5 months into a season, than I was with complete faith before a ball was kicked, if that makes any sense. Because he's not changing it up enough. He's a scattergun approach to substitutions, pathways to the first team, and at the end of the day, the team does not play aggressively enough. Now, boring sides can win league titles. Boring sides, though, what a boring side normally is that's successful is organised to the finest of fine margins and the highest of standards. We're now seeing Celtic at home conceding goals for corners. Like, what the fuck? So that's even the basics, the fundamentals you're not getting right, let alone doing the aggressive, exciting, forward-thinking sort of football we expect of a Celtic team. But if we don't get that side of it, then the bare minimum we expect, if we're going to be a bit duller, shall we say, then let's have the basics absolutely sorted. And we should still, even any Celtic team playing a slightly more pragmatic style, if you like, should be able to create enough chances, should have a hell of a lot more energy, intensity when they're on the ball. Starting games, lacklustre. Starting second halves, lacklustre. And that is doing my head in. The players might need to rock up their arse. But one thing as well, and here's why I continuously you do the comparing of the previous era to the current one, right? The problem Rodgers has got, I think this is what happened a wee bit with Lennon as well, is when he's came in the back of a very successful Celtic side in terms of domestic bliss, one that had been up to the last 3 months, I would argue, last season, played very exciting football, but it was Ange and all that same backroom staff. He should have brought in some of his own team. I think it's human nature sometimes to go, I'm not sure of this. I'm not sure of these tactics. See if you've got 2 guys, 3 guys behind you, all as committed as you to the same cause. It's far more easier to preach it. It's far more easier to get that message across. As soon as shit hits the fan, you've got people you can really trust that are going to dig deep for you. The optics don't always look great like that, because see when results go shit, you could kind of argue, well, Kennedy and Strachan will still be there with the next one anyway. They're not under that same pressure. Whereas when you bring in your own staff, firstly, the manager has people he can trust. Secondly, getting the message across and getting a buy-in from the players is easier. Thirdly, it means they're all singing from the same hymn sheet with the same pressures. Right now, the only one in that dugout properly under scrutiny and pressure is Rodgers himself. How did he come about getting this job, taking this job, and also in the third manager in a row at Glasgow Celtic agreeing to the same backroom staff that are already there? Lennon, Postecoglou, and now Rodgers. This has to be a question they get asked to do. They must be getting asked, by the way, is it okay if X, Y, and Z are there behind you? Well, yeah, it's fine. But I'm also bringing in A, B, C, and D.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there needs to be something done there, because otherwise, where's the real motivation there for, like the John Kennedy and Strachan, really? If their jobs aren't really at risk and they know, let's say Celtic do end up having a trophyless season, but they know they're going to be safe anyway, then there's no real pressure as such on them in a lot of ways, because they know they're safe as houses regardless of what happens. I personally thought Kennedy would have been out the door after the COVID season, but he seems like he'll be somebody that will hang around at the club for as long as he likes. I don't see the club ever getting rid of him unless he chooses to leave at this point, which is a tad concerning. You've got to look at somebody like Rodgers and think, what he could probably do with having his own man in. He had Chris Davies with him, I think, in every other managerial job he's had up until now. Maybe Chris Davies didn't fancy coming back. I know he ended up with Spurs and Ange Postecoglou down the road as well. But you've got to be looking at it and thinking, and you make a good point when they talk about, having that backroom team behind you. It's not so much about them always having your back in terms of tactics, but Rodgers will have the respect of somebody, will respect somebody more like, a Chris Davies or whoever it may be, if he'd been allowed to bring in his own staff. If they turned around and questioned them and said, look, Brendan, what we're trying here might be what you want to put into play in the longer term. At the moment, the players are not buying into this. We need to try something different. They might have offered something different to Brendan as well, and he'd be more likely, I think, to listen to that than if it's coming from the likes of a John Kennedy or a Strachan, who we don't even know how badly he really wanted them in the job, or he's just accepted that they come as part of it. Because I do find that a bit strange that, he's not had any of his own staff in there. It took Ange Postecoglou, about a year or so before he brought in Harry Kewell, and got one of his own in there. I still think there's a very high possibility that Scott Brown might end up getting dropped on Brendan, whether Brendan wants him or not. I think that is something that the board could potentially look to do, and hope it works. That's just them throwing shit at the wall and hoping something sticks. If you ask me, when it comes to bringing Scott Brown back, could work out very well, could end up being a total disaster, but it's absolutely the kind of gamble I could see the board taking rather than going to Brendan, or it's not even so much the board going to Brendan. Brendan should really be going to the board on situations like that. And I think in his first spell, there's absolutely no danger he would have let the board dictate who his staff were going to be when it was first time around. But this time around, he definitely does seem to be a lot more mellow. Something's not quite right with Brendan this time around. I don't know what it is, if it's just a case he did need that break so badly and he's just jaded with football at the moment and needed that year out, or if it's just a case he's came in very complacent because of how much success he had the first time around at Celtic and he thought domestically it would be another cakewalk. But something is just not quite right with the manager, and that also needs to be addressed, and he needs to, have a really good, strong look at himself, because we've, even on our channel, Russell, we've got people that were quite happy to see the back of him already. I heard Terry, for example, mentioning, at the weekend that he'd quite happily see the back of Brendan already. Marc's been fairly vocal, I would say, on Twitter about saying that he would quite happily see the back of him, and these two won't be along. If they're both thinking that there's going to be a large element of the fan base that are already beginning to turn on the manager, and that's why the pressure is now on him to actually prove he can still get results with the players that he has, because at the end of the day, Brendan Rodgers has a far higher stock than any other manager we've had in the last 10, 15 years at the club, by miles, in terms of his actual reputation. But if you didn't know anything about managerial reputations and you were looking at him over the past few weeks, he's came across as a bit of a novice with how he's been setting Celtic up. You wouldn't even be able to tell that this was a guy who's had the success that he had the first time around, the success that he's had down south in the Premiership. He just looks like he's not quite there. He seems like he's lost his smile, as I remember you alluding to previously. There's something that's not quite right with Brendan, and I think that is the first thing we potentially have to try and work out, is how do we get Brendan Rodgers back to the levels that we know he's capable of? Because if Celtic are going to pull off a Christmas miracle over the next 3 games, because for me, if they come out of these with maximum points with how they've been playing, that will be a bit of a miracle. I can't even believe I'm saying that. Livingston, Dundee, Rangers, if you'd said that to me 5 weeks ago, I'd have said that would have been a comfortable 9 points, 3 wins out of 3. Now I'm looking at that and I have absolutely zero confidence we will win all 3 of those games. But I think we have to, and I think that has to start with the manager, and the manager needs to change something to get fans back buying in to him being the right man for this job.
Yeah, I mean, to not have a player that you can hang your hat on as well, and then as well as the backroom staff, it's just weird. The whole dynamic's weird, and I think unless you really do hit the ground running, it'll be a lonely place when it becomes like that, and you look isolated.
He talks about mentality as well, doesn't he? He talks about the players' mentality a lot post-match after the Hearts game.
They're not his guys, are they?
They're not. Yeah, well, that's what he's saying. He's pretty much saying that. He's saying that they don't have the mentality to be at the club. If we're paraphrasing and reading between the lines, that's exactly what they're saying. They don't have the hunger. They don't have the drive. They don't have the passion to want to be successful at Celtic Football Club. In Brendan's eyes, that's what he feels he's seeing. And with the performances we're witnessing on the pitch, you can't really argue with that. There's too many passengers in this team that don't have the stomach for a fight. And if you don't have the stomach for a fight at Celtic, you're going to get found out. And that is what we're finding with a lot of these players at the moment, is that things are a bit choppy just now. And, the players aren't answering the questions that are being asked of them. And they're only going to get put under more pressure over the next couple of weeks. And at the moment, if the mentality isn't right, and Brendan's already calling that out, I don't know how he gets that mentality installed into these players to get them through the next few games. It all just feels like it could end up falling apart very quickly for this club, unless the manager is able to stage some sort of intervention to get them believing in themselves again, and more importantly, get them believing in what he is trying to do with this team, because I think that is a large part of it, as well as that mentality isn't there because they don't believe what the manager is trying to do with them. I genuinely don't think there has ever been a bigger disconnect between the players and the manager, since the COVID season under Lenny.
Yeah, interesting times. We will see. But yeah, just to be clear, whilst I'm very much of the viewpoint. I know you can't sack the board essentially, but I am very much of the opinion that needs completely refreshed. I think Lolo needs to go tomorrow, and the rest of the board, no more musical chairs. It's time for a real fresh injection of someone with a forward-thinking mind, one that's going to be aggressive, and someone that believes in what Celtic can become, not with a glass ceiling involved. Yes, there may be, I suppose, a glass ceiling involved somewhere, but you know what I mean. Their glass ceiling is set so low for Celtic that we cannot evolve. We pay the same wages to footballers we did in 2000, 23 years later, yet we're in the Champions League.
It's not a glass ceiling though anymore, really, is it? It's just a ceiling because you
Yeah,
can't
it's
even
the ceiling,
see
it's a
how
concrete
you can't
ceiling.
even see
Yeah,
you
you're
can't
right.
even see how we get better at the moment. That's how ridiculous the whole situation is. They've literally just got a concrete ceiling put on, and it's lower than the average person's shed ceiling just now. It's ridiculous how bad the board's ambition is.
2 questions for you then. Gets to January. Do we finish the January transfer window in a deficit in terms of net spend, or will we still make a profit this January?
It's a tough one. We should definitely be in a deficit. I think we'll need to be if we're going to get the players in that we need. I'm very interested. I think we'll have a good idea very early on in this window, to be perfectly honest with you, how seriously the board are going to take this. I go back to that first season under Postecoglou, and there was 3 players in on the opening day. That was when Celtic were being proactive, and that was when they did get a January window correct. Doesn't happen very often, but that is the benchmark. That is what they need to be looking to do this time around, is getting players in and in fast, send a message that we are going to continue to try and push forward. I think a lot might well depend on how that Derby game goes, because I do not trust this board for 1 second that if Brendan does manage to paper over the cracks, does manage to produce what I'm calling this Christmas miracle and produce 3 wins out of 3, do the board then get a bit more complacent and think, well, Brendan's managed to turn the corner on this, we can just give him 1 or 2 more projects and hopefully one of them hits the front burners really fast. I think they're also going to hit us with the fact that the squad is fairly large, albeit large with dross and not enough quality in it. And I wouldn't be surprised if you do hear the arguments from the board that they need to get rid of a few before they can bring some in. Wouldn't be the first time we've heard that one either from them. So if you're asking me whether or not we will be in a deficit, I mean, we should be. Whether we actually will be, I have absolutely zero faith in this board that we will be, unless we are trailing Rangers by the time the January window opens because of the reactive nature of the custodians of this football club.
How many points will Celtic gain between now and that January window?
It's an even trickier question. I don't think we'll win them all. The optimist in me says 7. We'll win the next 2. I think we'll squeeze through the next 2 and we'll draw the Derby. If I'm being honest, that's what I think could be how it plays out, and that's me being optimistic. I wouldn't be surprised if there's 2 draws in there. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a defeat in there with how things have been going. But if you were asking me how I think it could play out, I'd love to believe there's going to be a reaction from the players. This weekend, I think there needs to be one. I remember when Celtic did go through spells like this, where they would have 1 or 2 bad results in a row, you would know going into the next game, like for example, when Martin O'Neill, Stevens were on the back end of a beating, which didn't happen very often domestically. They would go out the next week and they would be pissed off and they would put on a performance and usually dish out a beating. I would love to see Celtic do that with Livingston at the weekend. Can't see it happening that way, but I think we'll just about have enough there. Dundee again will be tricky. Again, I don't anticipate it being a classic. I anticipate these games being very tight, very edgy, not comfortable watches whatsoever, but I think we'll do just enough against Livingston and Dundee. Rangers, I feel, is going to be a very 50-50. I mean, if we're being honest, the game at Ibrox was very 50-50, and Kyogo has a moment of quality that wins, is it? at Ibrox when you look back on it. And it's one of those ones where I anticipate it being a similar type of game. Again, I think the players will be up for that one. I think Brendan will be more up for that. I think he will be a bit more involved on the touchline in a game like that. I think when it comes to these sort of crunch games, his record does stand up. But at the same time, I just think there's an awful lot to try and turn around with this squad. And I just feel there's too many issues at Celtic at the moment that makes me think beating Rangers might not be what ends up happening, and we might end up fizzling out into a draw. But if that is what it ends up, then it'll be over to the board in the January window, because the title race is well and truly on at that point, and it'll be up to them to then make sure that we do our bit, because Brendan's and Celtic will still be in it, but for how long will very much determine on what we do in the January transfer window from there.
There's the main man, Phil McGinley.
All right, boys.
It's that time for the
How's
quiz.
it going?
I don't know if we'll want the quiz tonight, but I think we should maybe just do 10 minutes of Phil McGinley's take on the football. I like to read the room sometimes. I think there's 250 live, and I'm just thinking they're not watching for a quiz tonight. Jonathan didn't do the opening gambit. I think the fans have quite liked, I mean the fans of Celtic, viewers of the bus passengers. I think they'd quite like to hear what someone who was actually at the game on Saturday made of it all. Take it away, Phil.
Oh, God. I don't think there's much I can really add that we don't already know. It was a brutally toxic atmosphere. It's one of the worst I've experienced in person. I know things have been pretty rough recently. Obviously, with the Green Brigade ban has not really helped the atmosphere. But either way, we should still have enough in the tank to be beating teams, especially at Celtic Park, like, Hearts and obviously Motherwell a few weeks ago as well. But yes, the weird bit about it was when they went 2-0 up, I don't know, you didn't even feel like we've got a comeback in us here. Something just felt so off. There's an hour left on the clock, and you're like, surely to God, we can come back in this. But just at that moment when that free kick went in, and where I sit in the stadium in the Lower Jockstein, I had a perfect view of it. As soon as it went over that wall, you just seen it was going in, because I'm behind the goal. Again, Joe Hart maybe a little too far to one side, but yeah, as soon as he pinged that over the wall, you just the feeling of dread in me, because I could just see where it was going. And yeah, even in the first goal, I don't know if this was picked up on the TV cameras, but a lot of the Celtic players were all standing around arguing with each other as well, which is never a good sign. Who's marking who and all that. It was like Alistair Johnson, McGregor were in there sort of pointing fingers at each other. And it's like, that's never a good sign to see when the team are sort of like, bickering with each other when we're losing goals as well. But yeah, it was just a horrible atmosphere, and obviously it got worse. And then there was the incident, maybe about 12 minutes to go. Obviously, it's quite quiet because actually the lack of atmosphere. And again, where I sit, there was like a smattering of applause coming from the main stand. So most people applauding in this game. And that's when I looked over, and that was when it was that fan that was basically heckling the board. For what I've read online, he was pointing it all at Michael Nicholson, who's in the picture, because there's a few pictures doing the rounds of that fan in the south stand that's basically giving them all sorts of pelters. But yeah, it seems that Michael Nicholson seems to be the one that's in his line of sight that he's pointing at. Yeah, there was like a wee band of stewards around him soon, and then police as well. And he was removed for basically voicing his opinion as a paying customer. And that's not a good look, Celtic. Not a good look at all.
We make observations watching it on the telly, Phil. And we and Jonathan both seem to think that it felt like the majority of the rest of the stadium were kind of in unison with the, Lowell get to fuck and the bold chant. That is not something they've banked on.
No.
But with having been at the ground, how universal did you feel those sort of chants were? And also for balance, what was the viewpoint like of many of the fans? Maybe not in the form of chanting, but around you that you can pick up on, also turning on the manager.
I don't know if there was much towards it. There's usual shoutings and groans about, Rodgers, what are you going to do about this? The usual sort of stuff. But you look at the bench and what you actually brought on and what you had to choose from. There wasn't much else. After the 5 subs that came on, it was like, what else can he do? It's like it was just desperate stuff. The Bernabei one, I think, summed it up perfectly. There was a lot of groans around that one and a lot of confusion with the people sitting around me, because there's a guy who's not been in a squad. I'm actually squad for how long? and suddenly he's need to turn to the boy and going, but you're going on and you're not even going to play in your natural position. We're going to put you on as a winger in an attempt to bail us out here. It was desperate stuff. But as for the chants and the shouting about, you know, Lawwell and the board, the loudest noise of the day from the crowd by far. For the lack of atmosphere, and there was moments where the fans were trying to get behind the team, but ultimately they just felt like a real feeling of dread. But the loudest noise of the day was sack the board chants. It was pretty. You're saying it sounded like the majority. Yes, it was definitely the loudest chants in the stadium.
It's good to get that clarification, Jonathan, because it's easy for you just to take away when really I'm hearing what I wanted to hear. Do you know what I mean? I wanted to hear that chant, so naturally that then elevates its volume in your mind as well. Because it's like, oh wow, I didn't expect to hear that, and because it's very rare, you hear those sort of chants. They're in your memory a wee bit, you know, more poignantly. Do you know what I mean? But notwithstanding that, Phil's been at the ground. He's telling you they were trying to create an atmosphere as well. But undeniably, the loudest chant was actually aimed at the board. Do they pay attention to it, Jonathan?
I highly doubt they will be paying attention to it very much. They should be. They should be, because these are the guys, you know, guys like Phil and everybody else that's paying their hard-earned cash to go watch Celtic, you know, week in, week out, and, you know, going and buying their season tickets, and are the ones that are, you know, funding them and, you know, paying their wages, essentially. They are the ones that they should be listening to the most, but the board don't seem to really do a lot of listening to the fans on any of this sort of thing, and I don't think it's going to necessarily change immediately on this. The board are very reactive. We've seen it so many times in the past. I think they will probably turn around and poo-poo this and say Celtic fans are acting like spoiled brats because they've lost 2 games and try and take the moral high ground. I suspect that is exactly what a lot of them in the boardroom will be thinking, and they're thinking that, you know, get a couple of wins and everything will be rosy again in the garden, and it'll be interesting to see that if Celtic do produce, as I keep saying, this Christmas miracle and win the next 3, how much pressure remains on the board going into January if Celtic are able to re-establish a lead at the top of the league table, you know, and were able to pull off that victory against Rangers along with the other 2 against Livingston and Dundee en route to that. As to whether or not that gives the board a bit of an easier time. As I say, I don't think Celtic will win all those 3 games. That's then going to mean that pressure mounts in every single one of them. I'm actually going to the Livingston game myself on Saturday as well, so I'll get to sample whatever this atmosphere is going to be like. But I fully expect it to be a bit toxic if Celtic don't find a breakthrough early. I think there'll be Celtic fans that would quite like to you know, show how disgruntled they are with the board, and it won't take them very long to do so, because I think a lot of people's patience has run out with them.
Undeniably, I think that's right. There is a patience level that's completely ran out, and it's a wake-up call, hopefully, for the board. But you don't take much heed of it, Phil, do you? I mean, I think right now it would take mass walkouts, which I think were for slightly different reasons when it comes to GB and what's the one, the boys' view. What are they called? Boys?
Boys, just boys.
Is it?
Yeah. They sit near me where I sit in the Jogstein. They get moved to the lower Jogstein stand recently, so that's where they've been. So there's kind of noise at both corners, but now there's no noise because both of them are gone. Boys are standing in support with the Green Brigade, so they're not in the stadium neither.
I think the reasons have maybe flipped a bit, Phil. But everyone's going to end up standing together anyway, inevitably. It might not all have been originally for the same reason, but the target of protest will be to the same target, if that makes sense. So we might not all end up protest, but I think the only thing they would pay attention to would be some sort of mass walkout, some sort of real show of solidarity that you're not going in, and not with solidarity with the Green Brigade, but with what Celtic is. Oh, fuck all their idea of what Celtic is far removed what I think Celtic can be. Far removed. And I think the board's hopes and dreams of Celtic go as far as what their best paycheck and bonus would result in, not what a normal fan like me, who just loves the football side of it all, what their dreams and aspirations of it would be. I don't really think it factored into any of the thinking now. There's no ambition, there's no imagination. Everything is so predictable. Every decision is made without an ounce of excitement, without an ounce of, oh, we've took a risk there, without an ounce of creativity. Everything is fucking business. It's so straight-laced, so down the middle, so based on numbers that it doesn't help anything going forward. It's so annoying. But I don't think when we had those chants at the weekend, they on the border or whatever. Do you know what I mean?
The thing is, why is anything nowadays? It's all about money, and the problem is in this day and age, compared to say the mid-90s when we saw the Celts for Change and the forced takeover essentially with Fergus McCann, there was incidents outside the stadium of fans basically telling others, "Don't go in, don't give them your money." But of course, it's changed days now. Back then, there was a lot of pay at the gate and stuff like that, and nowadays, for somebody like me, I'm a season ticket holder. They've already got my money. So it doesn't make a difference to me. So the season ticket holders, they've already banked the money essentially. So how do you get to them? How do you? I mean, the optics of it, of a mass walkout and lots of empty seats would obviously get to them. But at the end of the day, again, it's money. They've got the cash, and that's all they care about. So how do you get to them? How in this day and age, where, as we've said enough times, the finance at Celtic's really good right now. They are literally laughing all the way to the bank. So it's like, how do you get that message across? I see what we saw on Saturday. One fan decides to, have his say. Obviously, he could because it was so quiet, and he gets kicked out of the stadium, gets removed. What is this, North Korea? Can you not have a democracy? Can you not voice your opinion? Again, it's just not a good look at all. The guy wasn't doing anything physically, didn't throw anything at them. It was just basically voicing his opinion, just telling them the way it was. But yeah, horrible look. So then it's like, well, you can't even get through to them that way. And even if more fans were doing it, would they all just get kicked out as well? So I just don't know how we get the message.
That's dictatorship levels, isn't it?
It is. I say North Korea, honestly.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. It's just not a very good look at all for the club's point of view to be not letting fans get their own points of view across. But even when you're looking at in terms of protests, even season ticket holders that decide not to renew, for example, next season if this one doesn't go very well, they've got such a big waiting list as well. The club that they're always going to find
fallbacks everywhere, don't they?
Yeah, they've always got the options there for people to actually take them up. So I don't think that's going to necessarily bother them too much either, because they'll just feel like they've got so many people that love the club too much and that are going to part with their money regardless of how the board runs things. And that's kind of your catch-22, is how do you go about, ousting the board or putting them under pressure whilst also trying to ensure that, it doesn't affect what's going on the park, and that you're still able to, watch the games, and, Celtic can hopefully get themselves back into sort of, performances like they have shown in glimpses this season. There have been moments where they've shown that they are capable of doing some damage even now, but it's just a case of trying to find that consistency. And I don't really know how they go about as fans actually clamouring for change with the board. There's very, very little they can do other than obviously the protests either inside or outside the ground. But I don't really think the board will take heed of that until such time as the wheels really come off the bus, and it is massively en masse with majority of fans taking part in that. And the only way that's going to happen, I think, is if we have a season from hell and results go so pear-shaped that we end up finishing the season trophyless, God forbid, because I think that is the kind of point where most people's patience would then run out and the board would have a lot to answer for.
Interesting times ahead, lads. Sorry we didn't do the quiz, folks. I know you put a lot of work into it.
It's all right. I'll just keep it for next week. I actually had this question lined up for last week, which we didn't do. I'll just keep it for next week. I'll just keep it banked. Cool. It's fine.
It saves you doing your homework again, Phil.
There's something that the board don't do very well, and that's called reading a room. And I think it's important when we're fucked off everything, the show just a wee bit more serious. I'm sure we're back to our old self soon. I'm going to get my voice to recover. Hopefully I'll be sounding a bit better. We are closing in on 1 million views on the YouTube channel. there'll be sure to be a wee bus stop episode, I think, with myself and Phil once that milestone is achieved. Thanks to everyone who's watching right now. There's 262. We really appreciate it, each and every one of you. It does keep the wheels on the road. But anyway, enjoy you the rest of your night. I know it's been a painful weekend. The road will be rocky, but it won't be rocky long. Keep your eyes on the ball.